Professor Dr. Björn Kjærgren. He's an associate professor of KTH Stockholm in the Language and Communication department. He holds a PhD in sinology, previously worked as a researcher in social anthropology, and is actively working to further KTH's education and research in global competence at KTH and in different international collaborative projects. Kjærgren is the Director of Studies for the Department of Learning in Engineering Sciences, and he functions as the Program Director for 2 bridging programs for architects and engineers with foreign qualifications. He works with issues of multilingualism and joins our speaker in this field. And he works also in the cultural diversity within the European University Alliance unit. So I'm happy to have him here, especially since he will broaden again the perspective to include the global view and professional needs of international migrants.
Thank you very much, Marike. And thank you to Andreas, Dulcinea, Maria, and Nuria for very content-packed and eloquent presentations. I will not try to compete with you, so I will try something as non-opportunistic as not having a PowerPoint to show you, and maybe I try to be a bit briefer as well. So my role in this was as a program director, as you heard, and let me tell you a little story about these bridging programs. So in 2015, academics in Sweden, as most elsewhere, were quite shocked and had an urge to help when the refugees came to Europe in the wake of the crisis in Syria. And the National Board for Higher Education went out and asked the universities if they were willing to contribute. And, of course, everyone wants to contribute to a good cause, so everyone raised their hand. And then, as the university machinery is moving quite slowly, it took 1 year for them to decide what to do, and then it took another year to say that, all right, well, we'll set up a number of bridging programs. What we want to do is we want you to take people who are educated abroad and who come here, and then we provide whatever they need to be able to continue professionally in Sweden. So Sweden set up a number, 10-something different bridging programs. And some of them were quite successful, and some of them were not. And I'm afraid I'm here to tell you about the programs that were not so successful, and dwell a little bit about the reason. And it's only partly to do with the language. So someone has to stop me if I talk too much about something that is not on topic here. But the idea when the question then came back, and the government centrally had said that we will set up these bridging programs, then they asked the universities if they were willing to take them, and KTH, Royal Academic Technology in Stockholm, said, yes, we are willing to take them. And were allocated some extra funding for this. And people at KTH said, so all right, we said yes to something. We're not quite sure what this is that we've said yes to, but surely it has to do with languages. So ask the Department for Language and Communication if they can take care of that, which is why I, who have a totally non-technical background, ended up as Director of Studies for these 2 programs. One then for engineers and one for architects, because everyone was assumed that language was the big issue here. And initially we had, of course, thought that, well, these are people coming maybe not directly to Sweden from Syria, but more or less directly. And then the Department of Education said, well, not actually, because by now, this was in 2017, most people would have had gone through the governmental funded refugee program, which is supposed to provide, among other things, basic Swedish. So no, that is not really the issue. Furthermore, it became, for different legal reasons, it became difficult to single out refugees and say that, well, you are not technically speaking a refugee, so you can't apply for this. So what happened is that the programs were opened, and the first intake was in 2018. They opened up for all foreign, all people with engineering or architecture's exams from abroad. And they were 120 ECTS, so nominally 2 years. But importantly, they didn't lead to an exam because these people already had exams. That was the idea, right? So they only needed to, brush up their skills, polish their Swedish or English, and get some, insights into, Swedish engineering life or the architect culture of Sweden and so on. And here, of course, you can yourself relate to a lot of what has been already said about the heterogeneity of the group and the different levels of proficiency, both when it comes to the language, but also importantly when it comes to their professional skills. Some of these people were barely out of university when they came. We had some who they were out of university, but they had to flee, so they didn't have their diploma with them, and they, for obvious reason, couldn't get a diploma anymore. But then we also had people who had been in Sweden for 20 years and might have an exam from, in the case I'm thinking about, that was backwards towards 30 years ago. So the issue was not Swedish. She spoke better Swedish than I do, I think. But no one would hire this person with an engineering degree that was 30 years old. So clearly she needed to brush up her engineering skills. And KTH is a program university. It's very ill-equipped to handle these sort of situations. And the study advisors had very little of the skills needed to perhaps even understand the situation that people were in. And of course, they were in very different life situations. Some of them were trying to work part-time, some of them were trying to work full-time, and a few managed to study full-time. But the system was set up, or these programs were set up so that you could study at your own pace, anticipating, as we were, that people would have different circumstances. Now, these people all had exams, right? So in Sweden, or at least at KTH, we follow the model with undergraduate studies being in Swedish and postgraduate studies being in English. So these people who had been in Sweden for a longer or shorter period of time, some of them were still struggling with Swedish, but a lot of them had managed to forget the English they came with to Sweden. And now suddenly all their technical courses were taught in English. And many of them complained that when they came to Sweden, they were quite good at English. But then when they came to Sweden, everyone was focusing on, you have to learn Swedish to be able to stay in Sweden, which is true. I'd say that. You can get by in English in Sweden with no problem. You can go to the supermarket, everyone will be able to communicate with you in English, but it will be difficult to stay on a job because, you know, when you go back and you have your tea breaks and so on, coffee breaks more likely in Sweden, people would revert to Swedish. So this turned out to be a problem, and it was I think one of the program's most successful courses was Swedish for employees. Nonetheless, but if people felt that their Swedish was sort of too good, that it was sort of humiliating to force them to take that course, they could opt to take a course in English instead. But that course was very well received, and I think because it was what a lot of you have talked about, it was very much focused on, you know, working life condition and very practical, hands-on. On the other hand, interestingly, I think in line with especially what we heard from Teusinia, was that we had a course in intercultural communication that functioned extremely poorly, and that more than anything else managed to upset people and create tensions within the group. Because as you mentioned, when you talk about these issues, there's a lot of things coming up, and you know, there you had people from Iran and Iraq, and you know, you go back in history, and everyone has a lot of things carrying into that classroom. And our teachers in intercultural communications used to, you know, well-behaved middle-class students, they couldn't handle that situation. So I think that was sort of an interesting thing for them. And then, you know, you had what's already been, I think Andreas mentioned it, and it's been repeated since, the problem with personal backgrounds, the academic literacy, what sort of educational culture you come from, and so on. And the program worked so that we had a few courses that were special for this program, like these courses in Swedish and intercultural competence or communication. But then the technical courses were taken from the university, smorgasbord, so to speak, because we, of course, realize that people will have different needs. So they got a lot of range of courses, which we thought was a brilliant idea, because then, you know, KTH is, at the time, we had extremely few courses that were open for students not being already enrolled in a program. But suddenly these people could come and they could pick, you know, computer assisted design course here, and, you know, bridge construction there, and you know, whatnot. But of course it worked so, because the teachers, again, they were not used to these sort of students, and there was no help, support, at least not a functioning help support to help the student really bridge the gap between the university and whatever they had been doing before the university. And in the end, and the KTH was the coordinating university. There were let me think, there were 5 universities invited to set up these courses, and only KTH and Sweden's second biggest technical university, Chalmers in Gothenburg, managed to start even. And Chalmers stopped intake after 2 years, and KTH stopped intake after 3 years, because we saw that it wasn't really functioning very well, and they are still around, these programs. So the students, once enrolled, they can work, and they take one, you know, there are a few students taking the occasional course still. But by and large, it turned out that what they really needed, these students, most of them, was to enroll in master programs to get a proper degree from a Swedish university, instead of something that looked like, well, you're taking these random courses. But that is also a solution that works very well for the student, for the university, because it's a program university, but it doesn't work at all for many of these students. So basically, I think that we're not catering to this group of students anymore. So this is my my sad little tale, I think, and I'll stop there to leave more room for discussion. Thank you.